Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We have a very special event tonight, the Sound Money Summit panel, with three experts joining me, Dunnigan Kaiser, your host here in the Liberty and Finance weekly market update. Right now, we have Larry Hilton. He's been referred to as the father of the modern sound money movement. And we also have Daniel Diaz, who's a member, actually, he's the executive director of the Citizens for Sound Money at the moment. Andy Schectman, the CEO of Miles Franklin and widely followed speaker on the principles of sound money. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on Liberty and Finance this Wednesday, June 18th, 2025.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us on again. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to be here. And as I was saying offline, a heartfelt thank you for both of your efforts in helping get sound money introduced into the system. And I know I speak for many, and we thank you collectively.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where I wanted to kick us off this evening, and just if we could spend maybe 5 minutes on each segment here, because we're going to have a lot to cover. Larry, I'd like to toss this to you to get started, and that is, as Andy just shared and I did before he joined in, the gratitude is well deserved for the hard fight that you've been fighting since 2009, and then getting the first state to go with legal tender status money laws in 2011, and since then you've helped about a dozen other states to get that across the finish line in their legislatures as well. The first question I have is, why is that so important? If we already live in a free country and we already have the Constitution and we have the Coinage Act of 1792, why do we need right now for states to get behind sound money legislation for the good of their people?
I think that it really comes down to preserving liberty. I think that a physical, non-debasing currency is one of the bulwarks of a free society. And we absolutely need that at every level. One thing that, as I got into this, that I was really kind of surprised to find is actually at the federal level, the laws that exist that actually allow people to function in the sound money arena. And so the state legislation just serves to kind of enhance that, because federally we've got 5 different currencies, legal tender currencies in the United States today. We have what we're all familiar with, the fiat dollar, issued by the Federal Reserve, but we also have, as legal tender, the gold dollar, the silver dollar, the platinum and the palladium dollars, and of course the base metal coinage, which the FRN, or the Federal Reserve note, is attached. So really, for me, this whole thing is about exercising choice in currency, using the right currency for the right job, and educating people about their options when it comes to monetary choice.
One of the things you mentioned, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Dunning, just a quick question to clarify. When you speak of the metallic money, you're talking legal tender, you're talking about the U.S. mint products, correct?
Correct.
Right. And just to add a little color, and I don't mean to cut you off, Duncan, I'm sorry, but I've talked a lot about my experiences traveling with coins through the airport in Montreal and in Vancouver into the United States, and how after spending, in both instances, well over an hour in customs, in special screening in the bottom of the airports, in both cases they came back and did acknowledge that it was legal tender, and the face value was that applied to the $10,000 border crossing. And so to your point, there are still some applications of legal tender with the precious metals that even before this law was passed in the state of Florida and others, where there were some benefits, I guess you could say, to having some of the precious metal legal tender items. Just thought I'd throw that in there to support what you were saying.
You're right. There's a very significant sound money safe harbor that exists at the federal level. And then that is enhanced and supported and built up at the state level. In fact, the states a lot of their laws get in the way of the federal laws. Now, the problem is at the federal level, you don't really have enforcement and recognition of the laws that are on the books to the extent that we really ought to, by the IRS and so forth, really recognizing the status of U.S. minted gold and silver coin as legal tender. But nevertheless, Ron Paul, Ronald Reagan, Donald Reagan back in the day, they all did their part to kind of right the ship after we were, listing toward, being going under the waves with the actions of,
But is there
Johnson and.
Is there a delineation between legal tender and currency? Is the question that I would pose to you as well.
Yeah, certainly currency and legal tender are distinct, right? So you can have something that circulates as a medium of exchange, but is not necessarily legal tender. But the legal tender brings you into the realm, brings you out of the barter exchange realm that is problematic for U.S. citizens, because when you're in a barter transaction, you're exchanging, let's say, gold or silver bullion for groceries. Under federal law, you're supposed to calculate your capital gains. So you need to figure out, okay, what was my tax basis when I acquired this particular, bar of gold or silver round, and how much gain did I realize on that when I bought the loaf of bread and the other groceries. And so it becomes an insurmountable obstacle to actually comply with the tax law when you're using non-U.S. minted legal tender gold and silver as money, for transactions.
And Dunnigan, I don't mean to monopolize. I just want to key in on one big point that we get asked all the time. Would you think this is why they would put a $50 face value on an American Eagle, because no one would be silly enough to use it as legal tender, even though it is classified as legal tender? My point being is that in the laws, they talk about the melt value plus any market premium as being applicable for payments for all debts, public and private. But when we talk about legal tender, I was able to enter the country with 240 gold coins with $50 face value, which was $12,000, but they were Canadian Maple Leafs at the time. And they did say they were legal tender. The exchange rate made it $9,700. I was able to enter the country at the time with over 300,000 in gold. It was several years ago, with no reporting, because they called it legal tender. Now, if I would have taken one of those Maple Leafs into the airport and spent it for a cup of coffee at a $50 face value, I would be an idiot. My point is, that delineation. So they did say it's legal tender, but using it as currency, it's not. So is there some sort of a delineation there that you see?
Yeah, that's what's kind of, you've put your finger on the dysfunctional elements of our current system, because under federal law, the Treasurer of the United States is tasked with the job of maintaining the equal purchasing power of each kind of U.S. Currency. So that means that a gold dollar, which is a 50th of a 1 ounce coin,
Right,
should have the same purchasing power as the Federal Reserve note.
$50. There's your problem right there.
That's exactly where I was going with that too.
$50 on it.
Yeah. So this is the issue, and this is where states come in. States can pull back the curtain, say the emperor has no clothes, and say this gold dollar is not equal to this paper dollar. They are two. So what we have to do is we have to recognize that we have 5, 6, depending on how you count them, distinct legal tender currencies in the United States, each with their own purchasing power. That's the key. That's what is happening at the state level. And of course, in private transactions, you can use gold and silver dollars all day long at their full purchasing power. Because when you're dealing common sense with the guy on the other side of the counter, and you say, "Hey, I'll give you this, one silver dollar coin for, a whole bag of groceries," then they're going to recognize that value. The problem is when you walk into a financial institution, or if you tender it for payment of taxes, how that is going to be used.
Valued.
So we had one member of our board who for 30 years he lived exclusively on a precious metal standard, and he paid his taxes in gold and silver, but he also earned all of his income in gold and silver US minted coin. So it evened out because he was using the same currency across the board. That's probably the biggest issue, is recognizing that each of these legal tender dollar currencies has a distinct purchasing power in the market until such time as the treasurer decides to fulfill his statutory obligations and make them equal.
I'd like to have a beer with that guy. All right, Dunnigan, I promise
Yeah,
it's all yours now.
this is what I'm. A host's dream is for the conversation to evolve and erupt so naturally, just as it has, and I hope that keeps going on throughout this conversation. I noticed, Larry, you mentioned in the beginning some very important characteristics that you'd like to make sure that every American has access to, and I think you said non-debasing physical money and the freedom to choose what money to use for what situation. Perhaps I missed one, but those were at least three of the things that you said. Can you briefly hit on why it's so important? And I think it may be obvious to some, to others, this may be just breaking open this idea, this concept might be putting the pieces of the puzzle together for them. Why is it so important? Each of those points, non-debasing, physical, and freely chosen money on the part of the ordinary individuals.
Okay, well, as far as non-debasing, we have, the history books, are clear that the base metal coinage to which the Federal Reserve note is pegged has lost 90 some odd % of its purchasing power in the last 100 years, or not even that. And so what we have is what Ron Paul, and this is what got me started on this whole thing, was what Ron Paul called the inflation tax. Maybe you recall this back in 2008. He was running for the US presidency, and he introduced into the consciousness of the electorate the idea of an inflation tax, which is what John Maynard Keynes said not one man in a million would be able to detect. So Ron Paul was that one man in a million, and he pointed it out to everybody. He said, "Hey, if you buy, let's say you buy a house in in the 1950s, and you pay $10,000 for it, okay, and then fast forward 50 years later, and you go to sell that house, you're going to have several $100,000 of gain, right? Because you had back in the 1950s, your dollar was linked to the silver dollar. Then if you take the silver dollar that was reinstated by Reagan in 1985 and you value that house, it turns out it's worth exactly the same. It's still $10,000. But the Federal Reserve note value is, $150,000, $200,000. So now you've got this enormous gain that you have to reckon with. Like, for example, my mother-in-law, she just sold her house for $600,000. She had bought it for $100,000. If you measured that in gold dollars at the time she purchased it and the time she sold it, she actually had a $100 loss. But using the IRS math, she had a $500,000 gain, 250 of which she could protect as, under the exemption, but she still had, a massive gain of $250,000 that she had to pay taxes on. So this is where it comes to choice in currency. So when you are buying an appreciating asset, the informed citizen will establish his or her tax basis in gold or silver dollars. you want to actually buy your house in gold dollars. And because since 1971, we've been able to, I think it was 1974, we've been able to actually have gold clauses in our contracts. So we can actually establish a tax basis in gold dollars. And so when you go to sell it, you want to sell it for gold dollars as well. And that's the measuring stick that you use to figure out what your capital gain, or in this case, with my mother-in-law, loss is, rather than this huge gain. So that's the non-debasing currency. So the debasing currency subjects everybody to really this fictitious taxation, which is just a money grab. And so that's the non-debasing piece.
Yeah, just to augment that, isn't it worse than just a money grab? It's actually adding insult to injury or injury to injury. Because first, since wages are typically paid in Federal Reserve notes, and savings accounts are typically denominated in Federal Reserve notes, and retirements are generally planned for in Federal Reserve notes, they're by destroying the value of the Federal Reserve notes, they're stealing your earnings, they're stealing your savings, they're stealing your retirement, and then they'll come back and tax you because they said, "Aha, you enjoyed a gain for any asset you actually owned." That
Yeah.
that that one, whatever you said, you take one silver dollar to go
Yeah.
buy a bag of something at the grocery store, and they say, "Oh, you enjoyed a gain." It's like, no, I didn't. You thugs destroyed and corrupted and
I
debased my
know.
money, and now you're going to make me pay for it again in the form of a capital gains tax.
Yeah.
And again, let me augment one more piece of that. Right now the average price of a house is about $417,000. And that's, I think, the mean price. There's about just over 120 ounces of gold, 121 ounces or so. So that's $417,000. If you go back just 25 years ago to 2000, those 121 ounces were $33,000. So, think about, did gold go up that much? Did the houses go up that much, or did the dollar fall by that much? And you can go all the way back. And we've done the one in 1960 where the average price was 17,000 and gold was 35. It was 435 ounces. So instead of taking out a mortgage, you leave those 435 ounces under your mattress, earning nothing but dust for the last 60 plus years. Those 435 ounces right now it's over $1 million, 1.2 million. And it was 17,000 in 1960s. You go all the way back, and now it buys you 3 houses. So, all this talk about non-interest bearing and whatnot, the real issue, I think, to everyone's point here, is that saving in dollars is the surest way to go broke, ultimately, over time. And so that's the gift of being able to keep money in what money really is instead of currency. And like JP Morgan said, gold is money, everything else is debt. And this is a primary example of what he really meant by that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Daniel, looked like you were going to chime in on that before we move on and let Larry go to his next point about physical money, why that's important.
You're very observant. Yeah, just to add on to what Andy and Larry were saying, that's one of my main talking points when we're lobbying across the country. I've reframed everything as economic energy. When we wake up, we go to work, or we have a business, we're exerting our economic energy for a wage or profits. And you can use that for anything. For if you're religious and you're focusing on praying or meditating, you're storing your economic energy, your treasures in heaven. If you are a thinker, a philosopher, you're spending your economic energy on ideas that could change the world. So when it comes to the physical economic energy and storage, look, the dollar is a theft mechanism. It was created for that sole purpose, to steal the wealth of the people and concentrate it within the government and concentrate it within the institutions, the banks, and those are what I call cantillionaires, those who are closest to the printing of the currency, get the full purchasing power of the currency that's printed, and as they spend it in the economy, it trickles down at the bases, and we get inflated, debased currency. And this is the importance of the sound money movement. We aren't trying to destroy the Federal Reserve System. What we're doing is creating an option, an economic option within the states, because we're the only country in the world where the smaller jurisdictions within that nation have a constitutional right and authority to declare gold and silver as legal tender. And by doing that, we are creating a parallel economic system, a parallel sound money economy where people can choose. Do they want to put their economic energy in something that is developed to steal their wealth, or do they want to put their economic energy in something that will defend and keep their economic energy secure and keep up with the theft of government and the central banks? So that's everything you guys are saying is 100% what this movement is about. 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck with not $1,000 to their name, and they don't know why. They don't know why their paycheck this year isn't going as far as last year and the year before that and the year before that. Most people have no idea. Not 1 in a million men can detect the theft. And this movement, 22% of the country has made gold and silver legal tender. I mean, it started with a spark with Utah, thanks to Larry and their original, believe it or not, the original Citizens for Sound Money. That's what his organization was called before they rebranded to the United Precious Metals Association. And they're the ones that sparked the movement with the first legal tender law in the country. It took 7 more years with Wyoming in 2018, and then it just domino effect. We have 11 states now that have declared legal gold and silver as legal tender, giving the residents and the citizens of those states the option to preserve their economic energy and something that will keep up with the theft of government.
Thank you,
Daniel and Larry,
Daniel.
are there states that are actually putting this into practice right now? I know there are 11 states that have done it, but are there states that are where people are actually spending? Are any of these 11 states really active in accepting gold and silver, other than it just being a law? Do you see it beginning to grow? Now, I know that there's people we talk about gold backs, but I'm talking physical gold. Have we seen that at all?
Larry, I'll let you take that. I would say yes, but Larry's been working in the movement for a long time, and he's the general counsel for Goldback Inc., and he knows how many thousands of merchants are taking gold backs, taking gold and silver. The penetration in Wyoming of people using sound money for barter, Utah as well. Since Utah is the longest standing legal tender state, Larry's been involved with recent legislation, sound money legislation for electronic systems and everything. Larry?
Yeah, so we do the UPMA, United Precious Metals Association, does offer a transactional capability between members where they can buy things electronically using gold and silver, gold backs, and also there's Goldback itself, which at goldback.com or at alpinegold.com, you can go and look up all the merchants that actually accept physical gold and silver for their goods and services. So, and it is growing quite a bit. As far as states themselves accepting gold and silver for like tax payments, I would say probably the front runner. Actually, Utah was the first one to pass a law to set that up so that the state would be paying employees and vendors and so forth. But then it was vetoed by our governor. So we're going to have to go back to the drawing table on that. But Florida's law that was just recently passed actually sets it up so that municipalities can choose whether or not to accept gold or silver payments for taxes and public charges and dues and so forth. And so that is that's a very exciting development. I think is Arkansas for electronic
gold and Missouri. I believe only Missouri and Florida.
Missouri and yeah. So we've got Missouri and Florida that are. I don't think that's actually occurred yet, but they've set the legal framework in place so that those kinds of transactions can happen between the citizens and the state. So I had mentioned previously that we had a member of our UPMA board who for 30 years actually paid his taxes. So the thing is, if you go to pay your taxes legally under federal law, gold and silver dollars are legal tender for the payment of taxes. So he paid his federal income taxes. He was directed by the IRS to make those payments in Ogden, Utah. And then he paid his state taxes to the California Franchise Tax Board, and they accepted him for 30 years because it's the law. So you can actually do it. You can tender it and point to the law and say, hey, you got to accept this. But in terms of setting up systems and, kind of the monetary currency plumbing to allow that to occur, that's kind of, we're on the cusp of that. We're kind of at that tipping point, which is really exciting to see.
And I can add some context to the accepting gold and silver as legal tender. Like in Missouri last year, when we were lobbying for the Constitutional Money Act, the Department of Revenue had an issue, and they put a fiscal note of like $75 million if the state of Missouri decided to accept physical gold and silver, because they added multiple assayers. They had to open up locations, do training, change the API. And so the states are concerned. Texas, 2 years ago, same thing. They had a fiscal note of like 21 million. Florida, I mean, we never got a fiscal note because we were there working closely, but they were concerned about physical. And that is the thing with the government. They're worried about taking physical gold and silver because of the cost to the taxpayers and the amount of the budget they'd have to allocate, in their view, for taking gold and silver. But the solution we gave that brought the fiscal note from 75 million Missouri down to like 800,000, because they insisted that they got one coin counting machine and an API of 275,000 and some other fees, was that they would just license with companies that already take in gold and silver, kind of like check cashing stores that you can go in and pay your utilities. They just remit the payment to the government. So the solution to get rid of that fiscal note for the states of receiving physical gold and silver is partner with the private sector that currently knows and has the machines and knows how to determine whether gold and silver is real. And instead of remitting payment in cash to the person who's selling you the gold and silver, you just you take that and send it to the state. So that we have the solution. These are things that Larry and I and others in the movement have been coming across, and we have solutions. So I just want to give some context about the physical and why Florida and Missouri went electronic, because they're really concerned about the potential costs of states taking in physical gold and silver.
Larry, in your story about the UPMA executive who paid his taxes for quite a few years in physical metals, did he just take the hit from the what we talked about, the Ron Paul inflation tax? The FRN, Federal Reserve note, as Andy has pointed out, it makes a big difference whether they're accepting them at true value versus at face value.
No, he actually earned all of his income in gold and silver dollars. And then he calculated, and he did not take a personal exemption, but he did fall within the lowest tax bracket, 10% tax bracket. So he paid 10% of his income to the federal government and to California state, or whatever their percentage was. So he just had a very simple return. He said, I had this many dollars in income. He took no exemption, and he just paid 10%. And that's how he lived for 30 years. And he was highly scrutinized by the IRS.
I can only imagine. And does that help him to be in that? Does it help him to land in that low tax bracket because the destruction of just as most people who are stuck in the Federal Reserve note system get pushed into alternative minimum tax because now they look like millionaires even though they're just getting by? Did he look like, he has a low income because they actually counted his silver or gold income in face value, and so he
he'd have like income of maybe $4,000 or $5,000 a year.
Got it.
Something like that, and he'd pay 40 to 50 or 10% of that, so 400.
Now, as long as we're on this, you mentioned people were kind of tossing out lots of questions because it sparked a lot of interest there as far as, well, what states can you actually do transactions in? What states can you pay your taxes in? What states can you do? How about states actually setting aside rainy day funds, actual assets on behalf of the good people of their state into precious metals? Do we have any examples that actually
We do. Yeah. So Utah did that last year. So they have, I think it's up to 10% of their rainy day fund in gold and silver, and they've already realized, measuring, using the fiat dollar, they've already realized a significant gain with that. Texas had their educational system. They had significant gold holdings, which they kind of repatriated back into their state depository, and then the kind of the
Wyoming.
liberal wing turned around and decided to sell that all off before gold skyrocketed. So
Yeah.
it was kind of a fiasco in that sense. But you've got those two states. Is Idaho set up to?
Wyoming did it this year, and so did
yeah.
New Hampshire. But New
New
Hampshire
Hampshire,
did a
okay.
combination of Bitcoin and gold and silver reserves.
Yeah. So
How
they're
about-
doing,
and, and
common sense
Arizona.
stuff.
I think Arizona was this. No, they did Bitcoin. They didn't do gold and silver. So just New Hampshire.
Okay, so that's one example of a state taking that role of protecting their people from debasement of the currency by electing to use a non-debasing asset, a physical non-debasing asset. I've approached a number of the Florida Homeowners Association, and I got rather cold shoulder, and I was shocked by the logic. Let me read this out loud.
Okay.
It says, let me be brief. Investments for HOAs and condos must align with their governing documents, which typically include low-risk government-backed options like CDs, money market accounts, U.S. Treasury securities, FDIC-insured instruments. The prudent investor rule applies. It always prioritizes safety and liquidity. Gold is a speculative and volatile asset. While gold and precious metals may have a hedge with inflation in personal portfolios, it is not FDIC-insured nor interest-bearing, therefore does not meet the standards of the prudent investor rule the Florida legislature intended. So this kind of backward thinking, please feel free.
Yeah, well,
Don't even get us
there
all
are
started.
interest-bearing options now.
We're all shaking our heads.
Yeah, there are interest-bearing options for gold, so that argument goes out the door. And gold is much more stable. I mean, gold is the measure. It's number one. Everything is measured against gold. Gold is actually money, and it is pretty much the preeminent money. So when you're talking about volatility, you're talking about the volatility of the fiat dollar against gold. But it was the same rationale that actually excluded gold from the recently from the Genius Act that's being considered by the federal government right now. They're not including gold because they say it's too volatile, and it reveals the volatility of paper
It's
currency.
the lie detector.
It's the
Yes.
canary in the coal mine. That's exactly what it is. So that's kind of it's kind of interesting that they would take that position. In terms of the Prudent Investor Act, and first of all, FDIC insurance, that is credit insurance, which you don't need with gold, right? That's because your dollars, only 10% of your dollars actually stay in the financial institution. The rest are all farmed out under fractional reserve rules. So then you need something like FDIC, which is capped, right? So that's only capped at a certain amount. And we've had some really heartrending stories about people that have moved their holdings into gold and silver, having lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in bank crashes because their balances were over the FDIC insured level. So there's, gold is physical. So that's part of the reason for that second point, the physical, is that, it's not something that can just, evaporate. The problem with really fiat or these government managed or central bank managed currencies is they have a kill switch, right? So when you're in their electronic system, someone can just turn it off, or they can turn it off for specific transactions. If you have a small business, you may have experienced with payment processors going through their list of these are all the types of transactions we do not support. If you are doing cryptocurrencies, if you're doing firearms, if you're doing cannabis, if you're doing, then you're not welcome here. There's the door. And so you have this ability when you have this electronic system and these gatekeepers to turn off the monetary flow for different types of transactions. And it can even get down to the level of social engineering. I know we've probably all heard stories about what's going on in China, where they say, if your weight is over a certain level, and you've eaten so much this month, you cannot go into that steakhouse because, or you can't order, they're actually, controlling what people eat, what they buy, what they, based on, and of course, your political leanings that
Yeah.
can affect your social score. So the prospect of social engineering coercion is great with a centralized electronic currency that has a kill switch, associated with it. And then the other thing you have is transactional finality, right? You do credit card transactions. Let's say you're a small business doing credit card transactions, and someone decides, hey, we're going to game the system. You delivered the stuff to them, but they come back and they make a big fuss and they reverse the transaction on you. I know several small businesses that have gone out of business because of a long delay, months down the road, they come back and a large transaction gets flipped around.
I'm going to take that moment and let Andy jump in on that, because as a bullion dealer, the CEO of a bullion dealership, he has had to deal with that electronic transactions can be reversed to the detriment of the dealer. But once we ship real money, it's not coming back. Andy, do you want to take that one up?
Yeah, that's completely true. And you know, if you do a deal for $50,000 on a credit card and you make $1,000 or whatever the amount is, you ship the metal. If they deem that it was fraud, and whether it be like credit card or even a check fraud, they have the ability to pull that money out of your account while they do an investigation. They pull $50,000 out, even though your profit on that was 1 or 2%. That's a situation that we've had to deal with all too many times. Makes it sometimes not worth taking credit cards. Fortunately, they've gotten the security features have gotten a lot better. But I do want to talk about one quick thing. Larry had mentioned this new deal that they're talking about, this Genius Act, and I think it's in an odd sort of way, it's very bullish for gold. And even though they excluded it, and you can see why they excluded it, because in essence, when you realize that net since 2014, there hasn't been any new central bank buying of treasuries. There's been central banks that have bought Cayman Islands and UK and Ireland and whatnot, but there's been more selling than buying. And this is a problem. And what the Genius Act aims to do is to issue stable coins to be used broadly for payments, which would bypass credit cards and banks, which would pretty much render the banks obsolete. But what it would do, and it's interesting, the Treasury would say goodbye to the banks in favor of this, because what it would do is create a tremendous amount of demand for U.S. Treasuries, as they would all be backed 1-to-1. You look at what Judy Shelton is saying, and she says, well, they'll end up issuing gold-backed treasuries next July 4th, 2026. She said that on my show, that they would issue those. That Trump has told her that, and that then it would be her belief that stable coins would be pegged off of those as well. She's even said that to me. But when I look at it from a broader perspective, if that were to happen, and you see this Genius Act, where this is a desperate act by a country who realizes that there's no longer any demand for our treasuries, and so it's not an organic demand as much as it is forced. It just seems that it compromises the architecture of the entire dollar. I think it inspires far less demand for the dollar than it would be under the traditional system if it were running the way it was intended to, rather than have diverged so far away from fiscal and monetary sanity. I think all of this ultimately is very bullish for gold, but I don't think they even would have thought about adding gold into the Genius Plan, simply because they want to find a way to fill the void in treasury purchases that has been a result of central banks moving the other direction. Just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and also to your point, Andy, last year the U.S. dollar dropped down to 58%. First time we dropped below 60% of Federal Reserve or reserve currency around the world. And talking to Rob Keens, I think he said it's officially under 50%. I'm trying to look for that information, but he's an analyst. He has and
Very
he has,
bright guy.
yeah. So you're right. The Federal Reserve is in trouble. The Treasury is in trouble because the Federal Reserve has been the primary purchaser of our debt. They're supposed to be the lender of last resort, and they're now the main lender of currency. They're buying most of it. So this is a way. Trump is very bullish on the dollar. He's also bullish on the gold. I mean, I think I mentioned. I don't know if it was this show. He loves. He has gold toilets. I mean, he loves gold. He uses gold all the time. Um, and it's just interesting on how they want to do that, right? They want to back the treasuries with gold, reevaluate it to the current market price, but that's essentially just inflation. What it effectively does, it just decreases the debt to GDP ratio, and bringing us below 100%. But we're still printing more currency backed by these reserve notes. And sure, the new treasuries, by law, they have to buy 93-day treasuries, backing these currencies.
Yes.
The
The
stable
stable
coin,
coins, you mean?
right? The stable coins, and it's just going to drive demand. They're estimating 2 trillion. In reality, I think it's going to be more because now they don't have to go through the Federal Reserve to print currency. They just issue these treasuries, short-term treasuries, and the stable coins will just bring it in, and then it's privatized. It's the private sector that is creating these stable coins, and to be compliant with the Genius Act, they have to back it with treasuries and equivalent dollars and so forth. Talking to some asset-backed digital currency companies, what they're going to do, what USDT is going to do, what USDC is going to do, because they have Bitcoin back in their stablecoin, they have gold, they have other assets. They're going to split off and create a US-based stablecoin, and they're focusing on Africa. That's where the economy is booming right now for stablecoins because most people don't have access to banks; they have access to the cell phone. So for the developing world, stable coins are great. It's better than their currencies. But for us, it's not good because it's going to just pump inflation. It's just a new avenue. Like when the opponents of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913 would do political cartoons with an octopus with his tentacles over everything, and he's vomiting currency into the stock market. That was the initial drop of the inflation. Then after '08, they nationalized Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and now that was a new avenue, a new guaranteed security that the Federal Reserve could dump inflation into. Then there was cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies, I believe, is just it's completely dependent upon the capital injection of fiat. And now they're doing this where they are forcing it by law to be backed by treasuries. I mean, it's just another avenue to suck up inflation.
It should be called the end of the World Reserve Currency Act. It's the
Yeah.
beginning of the end. The rest of the world would look at this and laugh, I would think. It's one thing when everyone wanted to hold our treasuries and wanted to hold our dollars. Now there's such little demand for treasuries globally that they have to come up with an idea like this that is mostly domestic driven. I think it is ultimately a very bad thing for the dollar. Ultimately, short term, very bullish for treasuries, short term, long term, incredibly bullish for gold. And I can't see how that would turn out any other way.
Yeah.
One thing to kind of understand about this whole thing is really the whole infrastructure for this already exists. The one thing that the Genius Act does is it takes the treasury and it puts the treasuries and it puts that in the preeminent spot. But through negotiable instruments, like for example, the gold back is issued as a negotiable instrument, you can do the exact same thing under existing law, under the UCC. So you could have stable coins backed by gold, no problem under existing law. So I think maybe what we'll see, what I'm hoping is that as these options become available, people will be looking and saying, oh, okay, well, there's that back with treasuries that's going to be debasing over time, or I could do a stable coin backed with gold, which there's, legally there's a path for that as well. And that's kind of what I think is kind of the smart move is to, look for those and then also, use the physical where possible.
And to your earlier point, Larry, and I forgot it. Yeah, I was letting you finish, and I lost the idea what I wanted to say. I'll come back to me.
Well, I just wanted to capture this because I think a lot of our viewers may not have heard of the Genius Act if they haven't been, because it just broke out recently, and that the idea being, Daniel, go ahead. You just got your light bulb went back on.
Yeah, so you were saying that we have 5 to 6 legal currencies in the United States right now, depending on whether you consider base currency as a separate currency, base metal currency as a separate currency. Well, this makes stable coins that meet those qualifications legal tender. They're making all stable coins legal tender with the Genius Act. So now we have 7 or 6, depending on how you
Well, they're
number them.
not actually legal tender. So they're
Okay.
specifically not legal tender, but they are a payment instrument. So they're like they're like a negotiable instrument. That's essentially what they are. They're like a
Gotcha.
traveler's check or something like that, which money transmitters can issue all day long. So that already exists under uniform state law throughout the United States. But what they're doing is they're taking and saying, okay, we want to create a new kind of negotiable instrument that basically can only be backed by treasuries, because you're not going to really want to back it with money in the bank, because you're not earning on that which you could be earning on a treasury. So it's all going to flow into treasuries. The other thing, though, that I think is a positive, in terms of our current fiat system, is I think that you're going to see the transaction costs go down. Right now, credit card fees can be anywhere from 2% to 4 or 5% in some cases. Whereas, if the crypto, because with these stable coins, they're going to be making their money on holding the funds, because they get the funds in, they put them into treasuries, they earn on treasuries, they cannot pass those earnings back to the account holder. So the stable coin managers, they get to hold all of that. So they could probably eliminate transaction fees entirely, or they can bring it down to the levels of current crypto transactions that are in just a few basis points. So I think that just kind of trying to make lemonade, lemonade
Well,
out of the lemons,
think
that is
about that for
one
one moment.
positive that you have just with the current system, but you still
Think
have a
about
lot of
that.
negatives.
The banks are dead in the water if that happens. The banks
Yeah.
operate on a fractional reserve system, and they're highly leveraged. They could never compete with a 100% reserve model. This would be the end of the banks.
Yeah.
If it moves in that direction, banks banking as we know it would become obsolete.
Yeah.
And so it's these banks have to be freaking out with this kind of
Yeah.
thought process
But the
that is
banks
actually
are
becoming
allowed
reality.
to participate. They can be a stablecoin issuer, so they
Yeah.
could have a little division that does this. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see kind of how it unfolds. But I think that there could be some positives for ma and pa kettle, as Edwin Vieira would say.
Yeah.
Just because of the reduced transaction costs. But beyond that, there's really not much here for the citizens. I think gold and silver are really the best thing for if you're going to hold your money. Why people would keep a high balance in a bank account other than just to cover transactions, it kind of eludes me. You really want to keep your savings in something that's just going to maintain its purchasing power over time. Andy, like you alluded to, I mean, back under the Anglo-American gold standard, you had literally no inflation for 300 years. You could talk about who was it? Jane Austen could talk about Mr. Darcy and say what an incredibly wealthy man he was when she first wrote Pride and Prejudice. And 100 years later, somebody could read that. Wow, he had a 5,000 pound annual income, incredibly wealthy. Because money maintained its value over that whole time, and you didn't have this joke about what are you going to do? Put your money under a pillow? Well, you literally could, back during the Anglo-American gold standard, and it would keep its purchasing power for centuries.
Yeah, and because gold and silver is fungible, you as a business owner anywhere in the world, you knew if you wanted to go international exactly how much of that currency that's backed by gold and silver, or the actual gold and silver, you needed to transact and make a profit. Because it was a global currency, gold and silver. Sure, we've always had fiat currencies from time to time. We've had over 6,000 that have gone down to zero. But a sound money economy is truly just, right? I'm a Christian, and God hates unjust weights and measures, and there's nothing more unjust than fiat currency because it is theft. It's not equal weights and measures.
That's true. And on that note, I'm going to have to wrap us up. Two things. One is I owe a sincere apology to those who have been on the live chat and have been asking questions that we didn't get a chance to get to tonight. But the second side of that coin is, gentlemen, I'd like to ask you back if we could about a month from now. We'll try to get on your schedules again so that we can focus on some of the viewers' questions that have to do with their immediate needs. But meanwhile, between now and then, I want Daniel and Larry to each tell us how can people who have been watching this or listening and are interested, how can they get involved? Who should they reach out to, or what website should they go to learn more so that we can all keep this ball rolling going forward?
Larry, you can go first.
Yeah, I think a good one would be alpinegold.com. You can go there and learn about, how you can earn gold on your gold, create gold accounts, transact electronically or physically, and, stay in that sound money safe harbor, so you're not going to be worried about, tax issues and all those kinds of things. So alpinegold.com.
And then
And
for
Daniel,
us,
from a legislative standpoint, how can people support your work and stay involved?
yeah, we actually had an issue with Stripe. We finally fixed it. So I've been going on leagues interviews. People were trying to donate. They couldn't. Now you can. If you want to support the Sound Money movement, support our lobbying efforts, you can go to citizensforsoundmoney.org. Citizens, the number four, not FOR, soundmoney.org. Join our Pioneer membership. On the far right, there's a button, Become a Member. It's $25 a year. That goes to covering our costs. And if you give more than $100, we will actually send you a free digital ounce of silver from Kinesis. You can also follow us on X. That is our primary communication, system. It's at for. Oh, sorry. The at symbol for Sound Money, the number for Sound Money. Follow us there. And if you are interested in bringing Sound Money legislation to your country or to your state, you can email us at support@citizens, the number four Sound Money, support@citizensforsoundmoney.org. Or you can call us at 877-749-1776, 877-749-1776.
Excellent. Andy, any final words from you before we wrap?
No, I guess when I think about this, when I think about all of this, it just, to me, if we see the global banking system be disrupted by this, I think it leads to a broader monetary restructuring, whether it be the way Judy Shelton talks about treasuries backing or being backed by gold, whether it be something more like the BRICS are talking about, which is a settlement currency pegged to gold, whether it be the unit or even the architecture they have right now, where they're trading CBDCs over bridge technology and settling imbalances in gold. When you see all the gold that's come into the country over the past 7 months, continuously, month over month over month over month, the largest delivery to COMEX ever, the May contracts, something big is happening with gold, whether it be on the state level, which I'm very thankful for in these guys' efforts, whether it be on the national level, something bigger is happening. Even Trump and Bissett, they're very gold bullish. All of them had comments like "He who has the gold makes the rules" on Easter Sunday by Trump, or internationally with the way that the central banks are buying gold, repatriating it, and talking about tying it to a new settlement currency. At this point, if people don't understand that gold is coming back into the monetary system with all of these crumbs that we've seen all over the place, I think they're missing the point. And I think really that's what this is all about. We are at a period of drastic change where I think the old rules are no longer working. The old system no longer has demand that it once did, or trust. And what gold is in your own possession is liquidity, and as Doug Casey always said, an asset that is not simultaneously someone else's liability. So interesting discussion. I thank you guys for your help at the state level for doing this, and look forward to doing it again with you all. Thanks for having me.
The other thing I forgot for those who are on the live chat and are watching this is we didn't do a rundown of the weekly specials. So if you guys just email us at libertyandfinance@protonmail.com. That's libertyandfinance@protonmail.com. Just put the word specials in the title of your email. We'll get you the specials list sent out right away. And gentlemen, thank you for this first Sound Money Summit here on Liberty and Finance. Really appreciate each and every one of you for making the time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having
Thank
us
you.
on.
Good to see you all.
Likewise.
Bye.